Imagine walking along a narrow dirt path lined with wooden homes, the air tinged with smoke from cooking fires and the earthy scent of rice paddies stretching to the horizon. This was the world of the common people under the rule of the daimyo, the powerful lords who controlled vast territories and commanded loyalty from their samurai vassals. Sit back and picture a society meticulously ordered, yet always on edge, where the lives of farmers, artisans, and merchants were intimately tied to the whims and strategies of the ruling class. The daimyo were both patrons and enforcers, overseeing taxation, land management, and military preparedness. Some historians suggest that their power depended not only on their armies, but on the careful cultivation of loyalty, honor, and fear. Others argue that the daily life of the peasants was less about obedience and more about survival, negotiating small freedoms within rigid structures. Imagine the rhythmic pounding of rice husks, the splash of water as women worked in irrigation channels, the distant clang of sword practice echoing through the hills. Festivals and religious ceremonies offered brief reprieves from labor, moments when communities gathered under banners of local deities, blending ritual with an unspoken awareness of the fragile order imposed above. Within this hierarchy, samurai roamed the land, visiting villages to collect taxes or enforce laws, their armor glinting in the sun, their presence a constant reminder of the daimyo's authority. Some scholars believe that this constant oversight fostered stability, creating a society capable of withstanding both internal disputes and external threats. Others note that it also planted the seeds of tension, as resentment simmered quietly among those who toiled endlessly yet had little say in governance. The castles of the daimyo, perched atop hills and surrounded by moats, were both fortresses and symbols of dominance, visible from miles away, reminding everyone of the ever-present balance between protection and control. Markets thrived in the shadows of these fortresses, trade quietly humming even as political maneuvering unfolded above. And yet, for all the structure, unpredictability lingered, shifting alliances, sudden edicts, and the constant threat of conflict kept life in perpetual suspense. The world under the daimyo was one of contrasts, disorder and chaos, loyalty and fear, beauty and brutality, each day a delicate dance on the edge of a sword. From here, we move to the secretive and disciplined world of the samurai, where honor dictated not just action, but the very essence of life itself. Step into the shadowed training grounds where the samurai honed their craft. The morning mist curling around wooden dummies and practice swords laid across straw mats. The samurai were more than warriors. They were living symbols of discipline, loyalty, and an unyielding code known as bushidō, the way of the warrior. Some scholars argue that bushidō was less a fixed doctrine and more a fluid philosophy, shaped by centuries of shifting power and personal honor. Others suggest it was a rigid framework, instilling a sense of purpose that transcended life and death. Picture the quiet intensity of a samurai drawing his katana at dawn, the metal singing as it slices through the air, a sound that might awaken birds or stir a sense of awe in those nearby. Training was relentless, a combination of physical skill, mental focus, and spiritual discipline, often including meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and the study of philosophy, weaving intellect and violence into a singular identity. The samurai's life was dictated by service to their daimyo, yet personal honor and reputation were equally paramount. A single misstep could tarnish a name across generations. Some researchers believe this fusion of duty and pride created a society that balanced control with individual responsibility. while others note it could lead to tragic rigidity, where the pressure to maintain honor drove men to extreme acts, including ritual suicide, known as seppuku. Weapons and armor were not mere tools but extensions of the warrior's soul. Lacquered breastplates, lacquered masks, and perfectly balanced blades, all crafted to embody the spirit of readiness and lethal elegance. Beyond combat, samurai were expected to navigate the intricate politics of court life, alliances, and rivalries, where a misworded statement or a poorly timed gesture could be as dangerous as any sword. And yet, despite the discipline, the world of the samurai was punctuated by unpredictability raids, border skirmishes, and the looming shadow of war meant that every day carried a tension between tranquility and violence. This life of paradox, of serene mornings and brutal afternoons, of poetry in the evening and battle at dawn, defined the samurai as both protectors and instruments of feudal power. As night fell over villages and castles, the echoes of their presence lingered, a silent reminder that honor and fear walked hand in hand. From this world of loyalty and blade, we now move to the hidden lives of women in feudal Japan, whose stories were often whispered behind closed doors yet shaped the fabric of society in subtle, enduring ways in the quiet corners of wooden houses, behind sliding shoji screens, and within the gardens that bloomed silently under the moonlight. The lives of women in feudal Japan unfolded in ways both visible and hidden. While the men trained, fought, and navigated the labyrinth of honor and politics, women managed households, estates, and at times even wielded subtle power in ways history often overlooked. Some historians argue that women's influence was largely domestic, a reflection of a patriarchal society that restricted their public roles. Others suggest that within these domestic walls, women were cunning strategists, educators, and keepers of culture, subtly steering the fortunes of their families through marriage alliances, secret correspondences, and control of household economies. Imagine a noblewoman arranging the day, her hands deftly sewing intricate patterns into silk robes, her mind calculating alliances as precisely as the threads beneath her fingers. In rural villages, peasant women bore the weight of survival, working alongside men in the fields, raising children, and sustaining the rhythm of daily life, all while maintaining rituals and traditions that tied their communities together. Some researchers believe these women were the unsung pillars of feudal society, their labor and wisdom quietly sustaining the castles and armies that history remembers. Others caution that the stories we have are fragmented, often told through the lens of male chroniclers, leaving shadows where true experiences lie hidden. In times of war, women sometimes took up arms, defending homes and even villages, while others were sent as hostages to secure peace or alliances, their fates tied to political maneuverings far beyond their control. The contrast between the outward beauty of their attire, the calm composure in formal settings, and the intense pressures they faced creates an atmosphere of tension, subtle yet ever present, a tension that whispers of resilience, sacrifice, and quiet rebellion. Rituals, festivals, and seasonal observances often offered women rare spaces of visibility and expression, where poetry, music, and dance allowed them to assert identity and influence. Even within the strict hierarchies of the samurai household, mothers educated sons in ethics and strategy, shaping the next generation of warriors and rulers with a combination of care and discipline. As the moon cast long shadows across tatami mats and garden paths, these women moved through a world dictated by the sword, yet tempered by wisdom, patience, and quiet power. From the hidden lives behind screens, we now move to the towering presence of castles and fortresses, the stone and wood sentinels that bore witness to centuries of ambition, betrayal, and war. Rising from mist-laden hills and nestled along river bends, the castles of feudal Japan were more than mere stone and timber. They were symbols of power, ambition, and the fragile line between security and vulnerability. Imagine walking along the winding paths of a mountaintop fortress, the wooden gates creaking under unseen weight, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, while below, valleys stretch endlessly, a sea of villages and forests waiting, watching. Each castle was a carefully orchestrated labyrinth, designed to confuse invaders, slow their advance, and offer defenders the strategic advantage of height, knowledge, and deadly precision. Stone walls rose in layers, their surfaces rough and cold to the touch, while hidden passages, secret doors, and arrow slits concealed the intentions of those who built them. Some researchers suggest that the aesthetic beauty of these structures, the sweeping curves of tiled roofs, the ornamental gables, the delicate gardens within was not merely decorative but psychological, a demonstration of wealth and refinement meant to awe allies and intimidate enemies. Others argue that the function always preceded form. Every moat, every ridge, every gate had a tactical purpose, an interplay of art and warfare that made these fortresses living instruments of survival. Inside, wooden corridors echoed with the footsteps of retainers, the whisper of strategy meetings, and sometimes the quiet despair of those waiting for siege or betrayal. Many castles became centers of administration, where laws were decreed, resources allocated, and the lives of countless villagers indirectly shaped by decisions made behind these walls. The sounds of hammers and chisels, the smell of fresh timber, and the sight of banners fluttering against the stone all conveyed a sense of permanence, even as wars raged beyond their walls. Yet, despite their imposing presence, castles were not invincible. Fires, treachery, and relentless siege could reduce them to rubble, leaving only memory and legend. Within their walls, samurai trained, lords plotted, and sometimes unsuspected acts of courage or cunning turned the tides of battle. The very stones seemed to absorb secrets, whispers of midnight meetings, clandestine romances, and the heavy silence of anticipation before war. As dusk fell and shadows stretched across the battlements, one could feel the weight of centuries pressing against the wooden beams. The sense that these fortresses were both protectors and prisoners of the ambitions they sheltered. From these silent guardians, we now turn to the swirling chaos of the battlefield itself, where honor, strategy, and survival collided in a deadly dance across Japan's fractured lands. The clang of metal against metal, the low groan of armored men shifting under the weight of leather and iron, and the acrid scent of smoke from torches and fires. This was the ever-present atmosphere of feudal Japan's battlefields, where samurai clashed not just with swords, but with the invisible threads of honor, duty, and survival. Picture a rolling plain shrouded in morning mist, the dew glistening on spears that gleam like frozen rays of light, as mounted warriors scan the horizon for the first sign of the enemy. Some researchers believe that the samurai were not merely warriors but living embodiments of a philosophy, where every movement, stance, and breath was a meditation on discipline, loyalty, and the inevitability of death. Others suggest that the battlefield demanded pragmatism, where intuition and improvisation often outweighed ritual, and where a single misstep could turn a lord's ambitions into ashes. Horses stomped the earth with deliberate force, hooves shaking the ground as archers loosed arrows in rhythmic arcs. The sharp twang of bowstrings mingling with the distant cries of command and the muted clatter of armor. Battles were rarely simple confrontations. They were intricate choreographies of deception, feigned retreats, and sudden flanking maneuvers, with generals using terrain, wind, and timing as weapons as potent as any blade. Amidst this chaos, the samurai adhered to bushidō, the way of the warrior, a code that demanded courage, honor, and unwavering loyalty, yet also required a readiness to embrace death as an inevitable companion. The smell of blood and sweat mingled with the metallic tints of weapons, the sharp edges catching the pale light of dawn or the fading glow of twilight, creating scenes both brutal and strangely ritualistic. Some theorists argue that the samurai's presence on the battlefield was as much psychological as physical, their disciplined formations and imposing armor serving to intimidate opponents before the clash of swords ever began. Others emphasize the human cost, the countless lives reduced to whispers in the wind, villages left in ruin, and families bound forever to the stories of those who survived. Even in victory, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on the lords and warriors alike, shaping the strategies of tomorrow and the fragile balance of power across regions. As the echoes of battle fade into memory, we are drawn next to the quieter, yet equally formidable world of the samurai's personal life, their training, their philosophy, and the rituals that governed both their martial skill and their inner discipline. A world where the edge of a blade and the depth of a soul were inseparably intertwined. Beyond the roar of battle and the clang of steel, the life of a samurai was governed by a rhythm of discipline, ritual, and quiet intensity that shaped both body and mind. A world where the ordinary and the extraordinary coexisted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Imagine a wooden dojo perched on the edge of a serene garden, the scent of pine mingling with the faint smoke of incense. As young warriors bow in unison, their movements deliberate, precise, and almost hypnotic in their repetition. Some historians suggest that a samurai's strength was forged as much in meditation and study as in combat, where hours were spent perfecting archery, swordsmanship, and horsemanship, while also committing poetry, philosophy, and etiquette to memory, blending artistry with martial prowess. Others argue that this life demanded relentless pressure, where failure was met not only with physical consequences but with the loss of honor that could ripple through generations, staining a family's reputation and social standing. Daily routines often began before dawn, the air crisp and heavy with dew, as warriors trained under the watchful eye of senior instructors, the wooden clatter of swords striking targets echoing like distant thunder. Meals were simple yet deliberate: rice, pickled vegetables, and fish prepared with care, eaten in silence or with minimal conversation, reflecting a culture that valued restraint, mindfulness, and reflection on one's place in the world. Some researchers believe the samurai's adherence to ritual and etiquette extended into all facets of life, from the arrangement of their homes and gardens to the precise folding of clothing and the ceremonial cleaning of weapons, each act a reinforcement of discipline and inner calm. Others suggest that these routines were also practical, designed to maintain mental focus, readiness, and resilience, for even in times of peace, the threat of conflict or betrayal never fully vanished. In moments of leisure, poetry, calligraphy, and tea ceremonies provided a counterbalance, spaces where the warrior could contemplate beauty, mortality, and the fleeting nature of existence. Yet even these moments carried an undercurrent of intensity, for each brushstroke or whispered line of verse was imbued with the same precision and reverence demanded on the battlefield. As night falls over the samurai's domain, lanterns casting flickering shadows across tatami mats and paper walls, one cannot help but wonder how a life so regimented, so steeped in philosophy and discipline, could prepare a man for both the splendor and the horror of war, leaving us to ask, how did these warriors reconcile the serenity of their private worlds with the chaos and bloodshed that defined their public lives? At the heart of samurai life lay bushidō, the way of the warrior, a code that was both a compass and a burden, shaping every decision, every action, and every thought. Sit back and imagine a quiet dawn, the mist curling over a bamboo grove, the distant cry of a hawk slicing through the air as a samurai contemplates his duty, knowing that honor could demand life or death in equal measure. Some scholars suggest Bushido was less a written law and more a living philosophy, passed down through generations in stories, teachings, and the quiet example of elders. Yet others propose it evolved over time, molded by the shifting tides of politics, warfare, and cultural exchange, blending Confucian principles of loyalty and filial piety with Zen Buddhist ideals of discipline and mindfulness. Central to this code was the notion of honor above all else, where the loss of reputation could eclipse the value of life itself and loyalty to one's lord. Or daimyo was absolute, a bond stronger than blood, binding the samurai to a web of obligations that spanned both family and feudal hierarchy. Some researchers argue that Bushido also emphasized courage in the face of mortality, teaching that a warrior must embrace death calmly, with dignity and composure, a concept that gave rise to the ritual of seppuku, a stark, harrowing practice designed to reclaim honor when failure or disgrace struck. Others suggest the psychological weight of such expectations shaped a mindset where fear was transformed into focus, and hesitation could be fatal, both on the battlefield and in the subtler arenas of political intrigue, loyalty tests, and personal relationships. Daily life under Bushido was a dance between preparation and contemplation, a world where the sharpening of a blade mirrored the sharpening of one's mind, and where acts of kindness or restraint were as significant as demonstrations of martial prowess. In ceremonies and tea gatherings, warriors displayed respect, humility, and attention to detail, reinforcing the invisible threads of social cohesion that Bushido demanded. Yet beneath the surface of these rituals lurked the constant awareness of mortality, a shadow that both haunted and defined the samurai experience. Every choice carried weight, every glance or word could reinforce or diminish honor, and every moment could bring life-altering consequence. As we follow these warriors through centuries of feudal Japan, the question lingers: how did a society so intertwined with the principles of loyalty, courage, and death shape men who could simultaneously create art, master war, and face their own mortality with calm resolve? Feudal Japan's castles were more than mere fortresses. They were microcosms of power, ambition, and careful calculation, where every corridor echoed with whispers, and every room held the weight of both authority and fear. Picture yourself stepping into a towering stone keep, its walls rising like silent sentinels over the surrounding lands, wooden beams creaking under the shifting seasons, and lanterns casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts across polished floors. Some historians argue that castles were designed not only for defense, but also as symbols of a daimyo status. Their layered moats, hidden gates, and imposing watchtowers, projecting a sense of invincibility to both allies and rivals. Yet others suggest that the interiors were equally a stage for diplomacy, etiquette, and intrigue, where decisions that shaped entire regions were made over quiet meals or in dimly lit chambers. Life inside was highly regimented. Retainers attended their lords with precision. Scholars and strategists offered counsel in hushed tones, and servants moved through corridors like shadows, aware that even minor mistakes could carry significant consequences. The daimyo's presence was a constant reminder of hierarchy, a living embodiment of authority whose gaze could inspire loyalty or fear, and whose favor could determine the trajectory of an entire household. Some researchers highlight the isolation inherent in such structures, where walls that protected also confined, and where the pressures of leadership created an invisible tension, palpable even in the smallest gestures or glances. Others focus on the culture of vigilance, the ever-present awareness of spies, traitors, and the delicate balance between trust and suspicion, which infused daily life with an almost theatrical caution. Within these walls, every meal, every ceremony, and every interaction was layered with meaning, a blend of politeness, protocol, and subtle power plays. Gardens were tended meticulously, not only for beauty but as a reflection of the Lord's taste, discipline, and harmony with nature. Armories stored weapons of exquisite craftsmanship, silent reminders of the violence that could erupt at any moment. In this contained world of elegance and danger, retainers, warriors, and lords alike learned the fine line between obedience and initiative, between honor and survival. As we linger in these corridors, imagining the quiet steps and hushed conversations, one cannot help but wonder what secrets were locked behind those gates, and how did the constant tension between loyalty and ambition shape the minds of those who lived within. The samurai were not merely warriors. They were living embodiments of a philosophy so rigid, so exacting, that it demanded complete devotion to duty, honor, and the hierarchies that defined feudal Japan. Imagine a samurai walking silently through a mist-laden morning, armor glinting faintly in the soft light, each step a reminder of years of training, discipline, and the ever-present shadow of mortality. The code of bushidō, often translated as the way of the warrior, was both a guide and a burden, prescribing loyalty to one's lord, courage in battle, mastery of martial arts, and a readiness to accept death with composure. Yet the interpretation of this code varied from clan to clan, from one generation to the next. Some scholars argue that bushidō was as much about moral and social order as it was about combat, instilling in the samurai a sense of purpose that extended beyond the battlefield into every aspect of life, from managing estates to guiding retainers. Others suggest that its most haunting aspect was the expectation of self-sacrifice, a psychological weight that shaped decisions and defined identities, creating a paradoxical tension between freedom and obligation. The daily life of a samurai combined rigorous training with ceremonial practice. Swordsmanship and archery were honed in early morning rituals. Calligraphy and poetry offered moments of reflection, and meditation cultivated clarity of mind in preparation for the chaos of war. Armor and weapons were extensions of the self, meticulously maintained, each blade carrying stories of past battles, each helmet a symbol of lineage and status. Honor could be earned in a single confrontation and lost in a fleeting moment, and the fear of shame often rivaled the fear of death itself. Ritual suicide, or seppuku, while horrifying to the outsider, was considered a solemn affirmation of loyalty and courage, a final act that preserved reputation when all else failed. Within this delicate balance of life, death, and societal expectation, samurai navigated a world where one misstep could unravel years of training and loyalty. Their presence dominated the landscapes of castles, villages, and battlefields alike, leaving behind echoes of discipline, precision, and moral complexity. And as we step back, watching a lone warrior silhouette against the rising sun, we are left to wonder what inner struggles simmered beneath the polished armor, and how did the invisible chains of honor shape the destinies of those sworn to live and die by the sword. As we move from the disciplined solitude of the samurai to the corridors of power, we enter the world of the daimyo, the feudal lords who ruled Japan with iron wills, cunning minds, and a constant awareness that their positions were never guaranteed. Picture the sprawling castles perched on misty hills, wooden battlements stretching into the fog, flags fluttering in the wind, each symbol telling a story of allegiance, conquest, and survival. The daimyo were both warriors and statesmen, navigating a complex web of loyalty, rivalry, and strategic marriages that could tip the balance of entire provinces. Some researchers believe that the daimyo's power depended as much on the loyalty of their samurai as on the fertility of their lands, the wealth of their merchants, and the political maneuvering within the shogun's court. Others suggest that the constant threat of betrayal and rebellion created an atmosphere of perpetual tension, where celebrations were brief and trust was fragile. Their daily lives were a mixture of ceremonial grandeur and tactical precision, councils in lacquered halls debated alliances and tribute, while secret messengers traveled under the cover of night to relay intelligence or negotiate with rivals. Their castles were designed not only for defense, but as statements of dominance, featuring layered gates, winding corridors, and moats that whispered both strength and paranoia. The daimyo's influence extended beyond warfare. They controlled taxation, dictated trade, and shaped culture, sponsoring artisans, gardens, and temples that reflected their power and taste. Yet, their world was never static. Earthquakes, peasant uprisings, and rival clans constantly challenged their authority, demanding adaptability as much as ruthlessness. Some historians argue that the daimyo were the true architects of feudal Japan's shifting political landscape, while others maintain that the samurai were the silent forces who ultimately determined the fate of their lords. Within this delicate hierarchy, every decision carried weight. One failed alliance could lead to years of conflict. One victory could elevate a minor clan to national prominence. As we linger in the shadows of these imposing castles, imagining the strategies drawn on ink-stained maps and whispered over flickering lanterns, we begin to sense the tension that defined life at the top. Power in feudal Japan was as much an art as a weapon, a fragile construct balanced between ambition, loyalty, and the relentless passage of time. And as we leave the echoing halls of the daimyo and prepare to explore the intimate lives of the common people, one question remains: how did those far below, in the rice paddies and villages, experience the ripples of this distant yet omnipresent power? From the commanding heights of daimyo castles, we descend into the quiet, enduring world of Japan's villages, where the rhythm of life was dictated not by political intrigue, but by the steady cycles of the seasons, the growth of rice, and the labor of the peasantry. Imagine narrow dirt paths winding through fields glistening with morning dew, thatched-roof homes tucked beneath cherry blossoms, smoke curling lazily from small hearths, and the constant soft murmur of water flowing through irrigation channels. Villagers were bound to the land, both by duty and necessity, cultivating rice, vegetables, and tea that would sustain the domains above and feed the samurai armies that protected them. Some scholars suggest that the daily toil of these farmers, often from sunrise to sunset, created a quiet resilience and deep connection to the land that defined Japanese culture for centuries. Others argued that life in the villages was precarious, marked by famine, disease, and the ever-present risk of conscription into distant wars or forced labor for the construction of castles and roads. Family units were tightly knit, with multiple generations living under one roof, sharing tasks, knowledge, and traditions passed down like sacred inheritance. Festivals punctuated the year, blending Shinto and Buddhist practices with communal celebration, offering rare moments of joy amid a life of unceasing work. The social hierarchy was clear. The samurai were protectors and rulers. The artisans and merchants provided specialized skills and goods, and the peasants supplied the essential sustenance. A network that sustained the feudal structure like invisible threads. Yet, beneath this apparent order, tension often simmered. Peasant uprisings, though sometimes brutally suppressed, revealed the fragile balance between authority and survival. Villagers developed their own rhythms, cultivating skills, stories, and local customs that were sometimes ignored by the distant rulers but remained vital to community identity. Craftsmen, weavers, and potters contributed quietly to a culture of refinement, producing objects that were both practical and aesthetically significant. Life in these villages was not simply survival. It was a world steeped in subtle beauty, in the harmony of seasons, and in the endurance of ordinary people whose labor shaped the very foundation of feudal Japan. As we leave the whispering rice paddies and the flickering lanterns of village homes, we are left to wonder, how did these countless lives, so humble and yet so essential, influence the larger tides of history that swirled around them, in battles they may never have seen, and in a social order that dictated every aspect of their existence? From the quiet fields of the villages, we ascend once more to the imposing presence of the samurai, the warrior class whose code of honor, discipline, and loyalty defined the very essence of feudal Japan. Picture a lone figure on a misty morning, armor glinting faintly beneath the rising sun, the soft scrape of leather and metal echoing through a deserted courtyard, a katana resting silently at his side, waiting for the call to duty. Some historians suggest that the samurai emerged not merely as warriors, but as enforcers of a moral and social order, their lives intertwined with a philosophy that valued discipline over desire, duty over self. Others argue that their rise was as much about practical power as about ideology, a means for daimyo to exert control over turbulent lands through a class trained to obey, strike, and survive with unwavering efficiency. The rituals of the samurai were intricate and deeply symbolic, the practice of archery at dawn, the silent meditation under falling leaves, the careful maintenance of weapons as an extension of one's own spirit, and the reading of calligraphy or poetry to temper martial skill with cultural refinement. Their loyalty was bound by oaths to their lord, yet beneath the rigid code of bushidō lay tension, rivalry, and the constant negotiation between personal ambition and social expectation. Some researchers highlight that samurai were not merely fighters but also administrators, advisors, and sometimes patrons of the arts, embodying a paradoxical blend of brutality and refinement. Their training was exhaustive, involving physical conditioning, martial exercises, and mental discipline, all designed to create warriors capable of facing death without hesitation. Ceremonies marked every stage of life: the cutting of age, the first time wearing armor, even the ritual suicide known as seppuku, a grim testament to honor that still sends shivers through the imagination. Yet, not all samurai were born into privilege. Many were sons of peasants or minor warriors who ascended through skill, loyalty, and circumstance. A reminder that the world of the samurai was both codified and fragile, defined by rules, yet punctuated by unpredictability. As we leave the echo of footfalls on polished floors and the quiet gleam of steel under the moon, we are left to ponder the paradox of these warriors, bound to serve, trained to kill, yet eternally seeking an ideal of perfection, loyalty, an honor that often existed more in the mind than in the chaos of the battlefield. What secrets of courage, fear, and discipline lingered behind the polished masks and silent stances of these legendary figures? As the samurai dominated the fields and villages, the landscape of feudal Japan was transformed by another emblem of authority: the castle. Massive stone and timber fortresses that rose like silent sentinels over the valleys and rivers. Imagine walking through the gates of a castle at dawn, mist curling round the high walls, the scent of damp earth and pine heavy in the air, while wooden floors creak beneath careful steps and the distant clang of a blacksmith hammers in rhythm with the waking day. Castles were not merely military structures. They were the heart of political power, symbols of the daimyo's influence and wealth, intricate systems of defense, strategy, and intimidation. Some historians argue that every design choice, from narrow corridors to layered moats and towering watchtowers, was meant to instill awe, control, and fear, while others suggest that their architectural complexity reflected an era of near-constant tension, where betrayal, siege, and warfare were ever-present threats. The interiors of these castles were equally telling: lavish halls adorned with lacquered screens, delicate paintings depicting landscapes and mythic stories, rooms echoing with the quiet hum of servants, advisors, and warriors preparing for council or battle. Each castle was a microcosm of feudal society where politics, war, and culture intertwined in shadowed corridors, secret passages, and hidden chambers. Some researchers note that the castles were also cultural hubs, hosting ceremonies, theatrical performances, and tea gatherings, a deliberate juxtaposition of artistry and military might. Yet, behind every gilded screen and ornate pillar lay vigilance, sentries keeping watch over every approach, trapdoors concealing dangers for intruders, and the constant tension of anticipating enemy tactics, even from within one's own ranks. The geography around these fortresses was meticulously chosen. Mountains, rivers, and strategic valleys were manipulated into natural defenses, while gardens and courtyards softened the brutality with aesthetic harmony, blending power and beauty into an inseparable whole. Walking the parapets, one could feel the weight of history pressing down, victories celebrated, betrayals plotted, and countless lives lived within these stone and timber walls. And as night falls and the lanterns flicker, casting long shadows across the courtyard, one wonders what whispered conversations in secret, alliances shaped the fate of entire provinces within these fortified bastions. What hidden plots, loyalties, and betrayals remain buried beneath the stone floors and behind the towering walls, waiting for history or imagination to uncover them. As castles loomed and villages thrived under the watchful eyes of their lords, a code of conduct quietly wove itself into the fabric of feudal Japan. defining the life of the samurai, bushidō, the way of the warrior. Imagine the morning mist curling around a training yard where young samurai, wooden swords in hand, move with precise, almost meditative, motions, their breaths steady, eyes focused, bodies taut with anticipation. Bushido was not merely a set of rules. It was a philosophy that intertwined honor, loyalty, courage, and discipline, shaping men who were warriors in body but scholars in mind. Some researchers argue that Bushido emerged from a fusion of Shinto reverence, Buddhist contemplation, and Confucian ethics, while others suggest it was a pragmatic response to the endless wars and political intrigue of the era, a moral compass designed to maintain order amidst chaos. The samurai's day was a ritual of balance, hours spent in combat training, archery, swordsmanship, or horseback maneuvers, interspersed with poetry, calligraphy, and philosophical study, cultivating both body and spirit. Honor, the very lifeblood of Bushido, dictated every choice, from battlefield tactics to loyalty toward one's daimyo. Betrayal was not merely a crime, it was a stain that could follow a man beyond death. Some warriors even practiced seppuku ritual suicide as a solemn assertion of integrity, a chilling reminder of the weight that honor carried in their world. Weapons, too, held almost sacred significance. The katana, with its curve, balance, and razor-sharp edge, was an extension of the samurai's soul, forged with meticulous care. Each blade a blend of artistry and lethality. Beyond combat, Bushido shaped relationships, diplomacy, and governance, infusing loyalty into the very structure of feudal society. And yet, as rigid and noble as this code seems, it was not without paradox. The same honor that demanded courage could also trap men in cycles of vengeance, secrecy, and shadowed conflict. Walking through a quiet training hall, one can almost hear the echo of practiced strikes, the whispered lessons of masters, the silent prayers of those who understood that every swing of the sword, every measured breath, was part of a larger, unseen struggle between duty, desire, and mortality. How did this delicate balance between discipline and death, loyalty and betrayal, come to define an entire class of warriors? What unseen pressures shaped their choices, their courage, and their quiet, relentless pursuit of honor? While the samurai upheld honor and visibility in their code-bound lives, another figure moved in silence, unseen and enigmatic: the ninja. Picture narrow mountain paths shrouded in fog, the faintest rustle of leaves under light feet. A figure cloaked in black, slipping past guards without a sound. Unlike the samurai, whose deeds were often public and celebrated, the ninja operated in shadows, masters of espionage, sabotage, and unconventional warfare. Some historians believe the ninja were primarily mercenaries, trained in remote villages to serve the needs of powerful lords, while others suggest they evolved from farmers and outcasts who honed survival skills into a lethal art. Their training was as varied as it was secretive, scaling cliffs with rope and hook, learning silent communication, blending into crowds, crafting poisons, and perfecting the deadly precision of throwing weapons like The tools of the ninja were extensions of their cunning. Smoke bombs to vanish in a cloud of confusion, hidden blades that could turn the tide of a skirmish, and even wooden prosthetics to disguise their movements. Beyond physical skills, psychological warfare was their weapon. Fear, misinformation, and surprise were as effective as any blade. Some accounts hint at shadow networks stretching across provinces, intelligence gathered in whispered conversations, secret markings on walls, or coded messages delivered under the guise of everyday tasks. Unlike the samurai, whose life was often tied to loyalty and duty, the ninja navigated a world where survival, flexibility, and discretion dictated success. Legends grew around them, stories of assassinations so precise that no trace remained, of entire armies misled by phantom forces, of men who disappeared into the night and were never seen again. Yet, separating fact from fiction is nearly impossible. Many chronicles were deliberately shrouded in mystery, embellished with superstition, or recorded by those who never truly understood the craft. Still, the fascination endures. The ninja embodies a duality, a blend of skill and secrecy, strategy and subterfuge, a counterbalance to the visible honor of the samurai, walking through ancient forests or abandoned castles. One can almost sense the ghosts of these unseen warriors, their presence lingering in shadowed corners, in the silence between the wind and the trees, asking the observer, who moves unseen, and what price is paid for mastery in the art of disappearance. As centuries of conflict stretched on, the chaotic era known as the Sengoku, or Warring States period, began to edge toward resolution. Yet the path to unity was neither simple nor predictable. Imagine vast battlefields scattered with banners and smoke, the clash of steel ringing across valleys, armies numbering in the tens of thousands moving like tides under the command of determined warlords. Some researchers suggest that this era of relentless strife forged not only weapons and tactics, but also a sense of political ingenuity and ambition unlike any before in Japanese history. The rise of powerful daimyos, lords of immense lands and influence, reshaped the map through cunning alliances, brutal conquests, and calculated marriages, while ordinary people endured the upheaval, often swept into campaigns not of their choosing. Among these leaders, figures like Oda Nobunaga emerged with an almost cinematic vision, using both innovation and terror to dismantle traditional powers and seize control. Nobunaga's strategies combined traditional samurai valor with firearms, a relatively new technology altering the scale and method of warfare, and signaling a turning point in Japan's trajectory. Following his death, the mantle passed to Toyotomi, whose campaigns stretched across islands and castles, binding rival clans with both diplomacy and force, until the majority of Japan was under centralized authority. Yet, unity remained fragile, and the final consolidation fell to Tokugawa Ieyasu, whose shrewd patience culminated in the decisive Battle of Sekigahara, a confrontation so pivotal that it reshaped the political landscape for centuries to come. The aftermath saw the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate, ushering in an era often described as stable but deeply controlled, where samurai codes were codified, commerce expanded, and isolationist policies drew a delicate curtain around the islands. Some suggest this period of enforced order preserved traditions and culture, while others warn it also stifled the dynamism that had once fueled relentless ambition and innovation. Walking through the quiet streets of Edo, now Tokyo, one can almost sense the weight of this transition, the echoes of war giving way to structure, the invisible tension between obedience and latent rebellion, the slow settling of a nation that had endured fire and blood for generations. And yet, the question lingers, whispered across centuries, in taming the chaos. Did Japan gain unity at the cost of something more elusive? The unpredictable spark of freedom that had driven samurai and ninja alike. With the Tokugawa shogunate firmly in place, Japan entered an era that would stretch for over 2 centuries, a time marked by order, stability, and an almost suffocating control over society. Yet beneath the serene surface, currents of tension and subtle resistance continued to flow. Imagine the streets of Edo bustling with merchants, the fragrance of tea and incense mixing with the cries of vendors, while samurai patrolled, their armor polished and swords at the ready, a constant reminder of authority. The shogunate's policies were designed to preserve peace and prevent the rise of new rivals, imposing strict social hierarchies and controlling movement, trade, and even marriages. Some scholars suggest that the sakoku, or isolationist policy, kept Japan insulated from foreign influence, allowing culture, art, and local commerce to flourish in ways unseen elsewhere, while others argue it created a pressure cooker, stifling innovation and contact with broader knowledge. Within towns and villages, life was orderly but constrained. Farmers toiled under heavy taxes, artisans honed their crafts to near perfection, and the samurai class, once warriors of the battlefield, adapted to bureaucratic roles, their swords more symbolic than practical. Yet, even in this rigid society, cracks appeared. Merchants, technically lower in status, gained wealth and influence, subtly challenging the traditional order. Cultural movements like kabuki theater, ukiyo-e woodblock prints, and haiku poetry flourished, offering glimpses of creativity and rebellion within controlled spaces. Some believe these artistic expressions were not merely entertainment, but coded commentaries on the inequities and frustrations of the time. Outside the cities, hidden networks of smugglers, ronin without masters, and clandestine schools of martial arts preserved older skills and codes, ensuring that the memory of the turbulent past was never fully erased. The era also saw the meticulous recording of history, genealogy, and local legends, a conscious effort to define identity and maintain continuity in an age where change was tightly managed. Walking through the quiet temples, the serene gardens, or the shadowed alleys of a Tokugawa town, one can feel the paradox: peace enforced through control, order maintained by subtle fear, and yet beneath it all, life pulsed with ambition, artistry, and an undercurrent of unrest. And as the centuries ticked by, one might ask, quietly, almost imperceptibly, in a land bound by rules and walls, what was truly free, and who, if anyone, still remembered the chaos that had once defined them? As the 19th century approached, the long shadow of the Tokugawa shogunate began to waver, and the quiet, controlled streets of Edo and Kyoto hinted at a coming storm. Imagine the mist rising over the rivers at dawn, fishermen casting nets into waters that have seen centuries pass, while merchants whisper anxiously about foreign ships spotted along distant shores. The arrival of Western powers, their black-hulled steamships cutting through waves with unfamiliar authority, shattered the isolation that had protected Japan for over 200 years. Some historians suggest that the Tokugawa system, rigid and steeped in tradition, was ill-prepared for such abrupt intrusion. Others believe that beneath the surface, pressures had been mounting for decades. Social inequalities, economic strain, and the rising ambitions of regional lords quietly eroding the foundation of control. Samurai, once symbols of unquestioned loyalty and martial prowess, found themselves divided, some clinging to old codes and resisting change, others seeing opportunity in alliances with outsiders, learning new techniques and embracing modernization. Intellectuals and scholars debated the merits of tradition versus reform, while the general populace, largely shielded from political machinations, sensed the uncertainty through subtle shifts, rising prices, stricter edicts, and rumors carried by travelers. The art, as always, reflected these tensions. Ukiyo-e prints depicted not only beauty but anxiety. Kabuki plays dramatized the clash between loyalty and survival, and literature explored the fragility of honor in an era of upheaval. Hidden corridors and backstreets became hubs of secret discussions, planning, and even rebellion, as those who once obeyed unquestioningly began to question the very order that had governed their lives. Some researchers believe the seeds of the Meiji Restoration were planted in these quiet years, nurtured by whispered dreams of a nation renewed and reshaped by contact with the wider world. Others argue that the collapse was inevitable, the weight of centuries of rigid hierarchy finally bending under the pressure of inevitable change. And so, as Japan teetered on the edge of a new dawn, one could walk through the streets and feel the tension in the air, almost like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon, silent yet undeniable. Sit back, relax, and let the echoes of this era settle in your mind. For the end of the shogunate was not just a political transition, but the final chapter in a centuries-long story of power, discipline, and the delicate balance between order and chaos, leaving us with one lingering question: when the walls of tradition crumble, what emerges from the shadows to shape the future? Imagine a land shrouded in mist, where mountains pierce the sky and rivers carve secrets into the earth. This is Japan before it was united, before cities hummed with commerce, before samurai would become symbols of loyalty and terror. Sit back, relax, and let your mind drift into an era where power was not measured by gold or technology, but by swords, alliances, and ancestral honor. In these early centuries, Japan was a tapestry of clans, each controlling stretches of land through force and negotiation, each asserting dominion over villages, rice paddies, and forests. The emperor existed, a figure cloaked in divine authority, but his voice often echoed faintly across a country dominated by local warlords known as daimyo. Life in these domains was dictated by rigid hierarchies, the rhythm of the seasons, and the ever-present tension of war. Farmers tilled the soil under heavy obligations, merchants carried goods through perilous paths, and the warrior class honed their skills in preparation for conflict. Some researchers believe that this decentralized structure allowed cultural diversity to flourish, as each domain developed unique customs, dialects, and artistic expressions. Others suggest that the constant friction between rival clans created a society obsessed with strategy, honor, and the delicate balance between loyalty and ambition. In this formative era, Japan was both fragile and resilient to land, capable of breathtaking beauty and sudden, brutal violence. Temples rose beside fortified castles, while coastal villages lived in fear of pirate raids and rival armies. The scent of incense mixed with the smoke of early battlefields, and the sound of gongs and drums marked both festivals and alarms. Rivers were lifelines and boundaries, forests both refuge and threat. Against this backdrop, the foundations of feudal society were being laid, a hierarchical order that would shape politics, culture, and daily life for centuries to come. Yet, beneath this structured surface, currents of change and intrigue flowed. Alliances shifted overnight, loyalty could be bought or betrayed, and a single sword could alter the destiny of an entire domain. As the sun set over distant mountains, the stage was set for centuries of conflict, culture, and an unyielding code of honor that would define an entire civilization. But as we watch these early flickers of feudal power, we are left wondering what forces would turn these fragmented lands into the Japan we think we know, and what shadows would linger in the spaces between honor and ambition, shaping the stories yet to unfold. Next, we move to the rise of the samurai and the forging of warrior culture, where discipline and deadly skill became the currency of survival. As dawn breaks over mist-laden valleys, imagine the quiet clatter of wooden training dummies and the whisper of swords being drawn for the first time in a cool, dim dojo. This is the era when the samurai began to emerge not merely as warriors, but as symbols of a code that would define Japan for centuries. Sit back and let your mind drift into the disciplined, sometimes brutal, world of these early swordsmen. Born from the needs of powerful clans to protect land, enforce order, and project authority, samurai were trained from childhood in the arts of combat, strategy, and loyalty. Some researchers suggest that the samurai's distinct armor, lacquered and adorned with clan symbols, was not just for protection, but a statement of identity and intimidation. Others believe the meticulous rituals surrounding sword care, archery practice, and horseback riding were as much spiritual exercises as martial training. Each blade carried the weight of generations. Each gesture in battle was choreographed to reflect honor, courage, and precision. Beyond the battlefield, the samurai influenced society in subtle ways. They became administrators, diplomats, and arbiters of justice within their domains, enforcing laws and ensuring the daimyo's authority was absolute. The samurai's influence extended into art, poetry, and philosophy, intertwining aesthetic sensitivity with martial prowess. Their presence was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a constant reminder that power rested not only in numbers, but in skill, discipline, and an unshakable sense of loyalty. Villagers might hear the distant clanging of armor in training grounds, see the gleam of polished swords in sunlight, and sense the silent tension of a class that could protect or punish with equal certainty. Yet, even within this rigid structure, rivalries simmered. Some clans used their samurai to intimidate neighbors or expand territory. Others cultivated fierce warriors as a matter of pride, seeing skill as a reflection of ancestral honor. The rise of the samurai also laid the foundation for an enduring tension between duty and ambition, loyalty and self-interest. Every duel, every campaign, carried the weight of expectation and the possibility of ruin. As night falls over the training fields and the last arrows strike targets under torchlight, we are left with a haunting question. How could such a disciplined, honorable class also become the engine of endless conflict? And what secret forces of ambition and destiny were quietly shaping the lives of these warriors? Next, we journey into the creation of Japan's first shogunate, where the samurai's loyalty would intertwine with politics, forever altering the landscape of power and intrigue. As the sun rises over the sprawling plains and jagged mountains of Japan, imagine the air heavy with tension, the scent of ink on scrolls mingling with the smoke of early fires in samurai compounds. This was a time when the land was fractured, and power was measured not only in swords, but in cunning alliances and strategic marriages. Sit back and picture the formation of the first shogunate government that would fundamentally reshape Japanese history. The shogun, a military ruler with authority surpassing even the emperor in practical terms, commanded loyalty from samurai clans across the islands, weaving a delicate web of control that balanced ambition with order. Some historians suggest that the shogunate emerged not merely to impose peace, but to consolidate the chaos that came from competing regional lords, each vying for supremacy in a landscape of forests, rivers, and fortified towns. Others propose that the shogun's power was as much symbolic as it was practical, creating a central figure around whom loyalty, law, and military might could coalesce. Within this structure, the samurai were both instruments and beneficiaries granted land, status, and the authority to govern local populations, yet bound by duty to the shogun's command. Imagine the gleam of armor under a rising sun, the clatter of hooves along packed earth, and the quiet rustle of bamboo forests that masked secret meetings and whispered plots. The shogunate also introduced a new rhythm to society. Taxation, legal codes, and administrative oversight reached villages that had once been fiercely autonomous. In this system, allegiance could mean survival, and missteps could be fatal. Some scholars believe that the balance between central authority and local autonomy was a constant source of tension, shaping centuries of internal conflict. Others point to the shogunate's role in fostering culture tea ceremonies. No theater and Zen gardens flourished under its relative stability, showing that even in militarized societies, beauty and philosophy found a place. Yet, behind every polished hall and well-tended garden, ambition simmered. Samurai and daimyo alike tested boundaries, seeking advantage in the shadows. Each decision, each campaign, was a subtle negotiation between loyalty and self-interest. And as the first shogunate settled into power, a lingering question remained. How long could such a fragile balance endure in a land where honor, ambition, and the edge of a sword dictated the fate of men and nations alike? Next, we explore the everyday life under this emerging feudal system, where the rhythm of the village intertwined with the shadow of the warrior.